Hello, friends of the On the Way Home podcast. I am Michael Braithewaite from Blue Door. I have an awesome guest with me today, Mark Boschek. Before we get to Mark, I should tell you, this is a co-production of Blue Door and the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. Right now, we are doing this live from the conference. I think there's about 1,300 people here gathered together to learn and share and just build knowledge, build awareness in the battle to prevent and end homelessness. We have Indigenous leaders here. We just talked about on our last one that when you're doing this live, problems happen. We're gonna have to re-record it, but Marie Cecile was incredible talking about anti-Black racism and homelessness and the overrepresentation. So this is an incredible conference. Mark was one of our first guests on the predecessor podcast to this that was called Out of the Blue. And he was one of my first guests back when we were just starting out. Continues to do amazing things. Mark's going to tell you about himself, but I'll tell you this. I think for the longest time when I first knew Mark, I assumed that this was his career. This is what he did. He was, fighting to end homelessness. And like me, this is what he did for a living. No. He's doing another full-time job on top of this. This comes out of a passion. But I'm going to let Mark tell you all about that. So tell us a little bit about your journey into this sector.
Okay. Well, it started, my journey started as a youth. I actually was homeless on the streets of Vancouver for a short period of time, and I experienced that. And I saw some things there that just stuck with me to the core. And one of those was a young girl willing to give up her body just for a safe place to sleep for a couple of days. And to me, that was incomprehensible. And I didn't think about that for 30 years until I saw this film on homelessness. And it was called Us and Them. And it really, really touched my heart at that time because, not only did I experience homelessness, I have a cousin experienced homeless. My grandfather died on the streets of Calgary homeless, who I never ever met. So once I saw this film, it really, really touched me and just inspired me to change my focus from work to community. And so that kind of opened up some doors, and I started doing some research and was astounded at really what was going on, and nobody was doing anything about it up where I live. So I decided to put my foot in the water, let's say, and go for a swim, and it's literally been one of the best experiences in my life. Heartbreaking. I've never had, it's devastating out there what people are going through, and it's hard to swallow some days going home and knowing I got food in my fridge and I'm throwing a log on my fire and climbing into my bed. But the more people out there, the better off we are, and we're going to solve this. I know it. I know that rural homelessness is going to end in my lifetime.
And you've taken a huge step. So let's talk about some of your work that you've done. Again, volunteering. Like, how did you even know where to start? Did you just start talking with some people, or where did you even start saying, I'm going to be part of the solution? I saw this movie. I'm inspired. How did you get started?
Well, to tell you the truth, Google. And then I Googled the organization in Edmonton. It was formerly the Alberta Rural Development Network. Right. And so I talked to a guy on there, and he kind of set me on the path. And then I ran a couple projects through them as a volunteer, and now I sit on their board. I was one of the first community members to sit on this national board of RDN, and they've gone national now. So I've gone through estimation studies, and that's where I learned it wasn't more the addiction or the drinking, it was more mental health and stuff. And so then from there I got involved with the Canadian Mental Health Association and became what's called the Rural Animator. And so we have this connection of like 150 different community animators that are working on rural health in these small communities. So you just keep feeding off projects that are going on there, and I just keep finding data and going to the source and saying, why is this happening, and find the issues and then try to resolve the issues. So
he's being extremely humble. Let me tell you why. But I said, are you still, when he came in, because it's been a couple of years since we talked, I said, are you still working full time, or are you actually doing this for a living now? And he said, no, I'm still doing it full time. And not only that, he said, well, and I ran for council because I wanted, politically I wanted to make a difference and bring together people. And when he said that I ran for it, he didn't say I won, but he did win. So you won. So what's that been like? What was that journey like?
Well, it's really interesting to see what's going on behind the municipal aspect, because that was something that was a wall I was hitting constantly. I would present, I'd get lots of good feedback, but nothing would happen, and trying to get that buy-in from the municipalities. And so until I actually got on there, see what shape our community's in, what we're struggling with as a community for finances, because we don't have a very rich community.
Yeah.
And so there isn't a lot of extra money. There's maybe $50,000-$60,000 a year, and so you really want to see what's going on. I want to find out what's going on with our FCSS department, because there's a lot of other FCSS departments in the province fighting homelessness, yet ours isn't. So you got to find out really what's going on there before I can advocate for the change.
Sure.
Yeah, literally a year today is when I sat down in my chair for the first time, and I think we've come a long ways, and we're moving in the right direction.
You talked about that. Sorry, but you were saying that one of the things you've done is bringing other counselors together from different communities. You formed a task force. Tell me about that.
Okay, so I was advocating for better supports at our hospital, because we live in a small rural community. So if anybody has a mental health distress, we have to transport them 2.5 hours to the next community. And that's not a big problem if it's working, but I'd be getting calls from people that they're walking around the street, they have no way to get home, their shoes were taken because they tried to commit suicide. So they're walking around shoeless at 12 o'clock at night in another community 2.5 hours away with no way to get back. And we're doing that almost once a week from our community. So one of the examples the staff sergeant gave us is a guy lit a little fire in an ATM to keep warm. They went there, they found out he had mental health issues. So they had to call in another officer because this is a Friday night. So 2 officers took this guy all the way to Grand Prairie. The doctor wrote him a prescription, and they had to bring him back. Wow. And that's just the tiny cusp of what's going on in our emergency room for mental health care, right? So I advocated all the way to the top of our province and to the top of our health services there. And I didn't really have that credibility, even though I had the stats and stuff. They're like, oh, that's really nice, but your community doesn't qualify. So then I thought, well, I'm going to get some manpower together. And so I put this little presentation together, and I went to all the local municipalities and asked them, and it was unanimous. They were actually fighting to see, not fighting, but which counselor would be the one that could step on there. So we're now meeting as a group of 6 regional counselors. I don't count myself as a counselor because I'm taking this on through a different role.
Right.
So we've got 6 different counselors, and we're all focusing on helping the RCMP deal with the mental health crisis that we're dealing with. And our staff sergeant sits on this group too, and he's brought a ton of credibility. And I saw a crime report presentation, and they were saying, a lot of times up to 50% of police calls are non-crime related. And so I asked our staff sergeant what our percentage was, and he says it's around 90. And we have a rapid response team, a mental health nurse, and what gave a presentation, and she outright admitted they only get an hour and a half of training themselves. So these RCMP guys are doing 90% of their calls with an hour and a half of training. And so even just through this task force group, we met with the head of our mental health in our community. We related this issue. And so she's putting a package together for our RCMP in our town, a little in-house training, like to help them have access to, because they have so many calls, and they're struggling. It's hard to handle it without the proper tools, and they're getting frustrated driving back and forth, and it's never at the beginning of a shift. So you're incurring so much time traveling 8 hours for no reason a lot of the times,
So this is so people understand too, like Peace River, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So in small communities, no emergency shelter, right? Like no.
Well, we did open emergency shelter. Yeah, that's another story.
But you opened that,
yes,
right? Because there was nothing there. You're finding people. Where do they go, right?
Yeah.
Were you not? Did you not? Do I remember correctly that you took someone in your house, or you were trying to I remember something like that was the means people had. But tell me about emergency shelter now.
Well, through RDN, we did the community estimation, and it came out that Peace River had more people sleeping on Park City benches and rough than any other community that did the thing. So we used that data. We got our women's shelter, we got the Friendship Center, we got AHS, we got the RCMP, and myself. We had 4 meetings, and we opened up the shelter. and we ran it strictly with volunteers. So we didn't have a cent of government money, and we just ran the shelter. 6 volunteers a day, 7 days a week, from December until March. And
So
now,
seasonal, yeah, okay.
and then now, right when that's just open part of it, and so then we got Reaching Hope funding, and so now the shelter's open 7 days a week, all year round.
Amazing. Right? This is what happens with community leaders. People do small communities. If I hear Mark talking correctly, it's just not the resources, right? You're talking about driving 8 hours of doing that. Is that, we talked with Ian DeYoung just about in Canada, it's different, but he was saying, taking it enforcement versus social kind of sense, right? And you're saying, if I hear you correctly, 90% of these calls, it's not really for enforcement, but it is around these mental health challenges, and without the training. And again, people are quick to point the finger at police, but if you don't have the training, what can you do? I know the mental health nurses are even on forces such as York Region, where I'm from, in Toronto. They do have mental health crisis teams to respond. They're overwhelmed. The good number of calls coming to them is not big enough for them to respond to everything. But we've seen that at Blue Door. We see it in action with there's such a difference. The mental health crisis teams coming in instead of just enforcing, and what a difference it makes in that individual to the whole situation.
Oh, it does, and I've actually got to experience that one time too. Is on a special call. Unfortunately, the nurse was not available for that type of call, but I was able to meet at a door with 2 RCMP officers and down to the hospital for care. Whereas for that, we were probably looking at dragging him out of there in handcuffs. He's a big boy, and there was 2 officers and myself, and he's schizophrenic, and I was like, we need more manpower if we're gonna go south on this, and luckily, and that's where that comes in handy, is people feel a little more respected when they're talking, just thrown up against a wall and bang in there, and they're not so defiant, and the defiance kind of, and so I was kind of glad for that experience, just kind of how the RCDP deals with it, as well as how the people respond to. So it doesn't work the best, but
no, I mean, probably a lot better, and you're doing work to continue to make that better. It's some of the task force. So today, you're actually?
Yes, I'm going to present on our problems, but the only way to solve homelessness is to collaborate and work together. And so our community together like that. And now we're getting other communities asking us. We shared, even though we only had a couple of meetings with our task force, I'm already sharing all this information, how to get there, how to start them, and how to run them and stuff.
Well, you
Well, I'm on Facebook. Generally, that's kind of where I share all my information there, and LinkedIn. And but yeah, it's adapting what's unique issues is a key point, really, and focusing on those issues, because each 20 minutes away from me, they have completely different issues, because just for their town site, where they're located, and what resources. We're all together, and we all, our hospitals are being overrun, and so something change, and who drives that in the community when the emergency room says, "Hey, we're not for those guys time." So, I really want one of the most pressing needs in our community.
Well, it's municipal and housing is huge, right? And the reason, but a former or before it was just now it's affecting the middle class, so it's real for the counselors. What do you get about it? So no longer their heads. It's truly public service. I don't want to slam. It's up to us in the sector to also support them around solutions, bringing partners together. And I'm just blown away and these different things that wouldn't have happened in your community. It's show that
when I pressed mayor the other day, absolutely, it's always diverse, and catching cells on fire, and we have to start, somewhere.
you do. I love back with you. Welcome to having the work. It will inspire you. And he's right.